If you have £100,000 sitting in a savings account today, it can feel like you have already made it, like the hard part is over. But at current inflation, that comfort is quietly costing you close to £3,500 a year in lost buying power. The number on the screen stays the same. What it can actually buy keeps shrinking underneath you. That is the question behind why your life transforms at certain wealth levels and why it can feel like nothing changes even as the balance goes up. The standard advice says split every pay rise, save a bit more each year, and you will climb the ladder rung by rung. If your salary is still climbing at 35, that works. If you are 58 and your income peaked 5 years ago, that advice has nothing left to give you. You are not failing the plan. The plan was written for someone 20 years younger than you. Here is the piece almost nobody names properly. The gap between feeling stuck and feeling free is not a bigger salary. It is 3 years of liquid runway, money you could live on for 3 years without selling a single asset at the wrong moment. Without that runway, you spend your 60s treading water no matter what your payslip says. With it, the whole shape of your options changes. I am going to walk you through the 7 levels of wealth built specifically for someone in the 55 to 65 window here in the United Kingdom, and why the wall so many people hit at level 4 needs a completely different strategy once earning more stops being an option. If you are in that window and you would rather buy back your time than chase one more pay rise, subscribe to Arthur's UK Retirement Guide. We look at exactly this kind of shift every week. Level 1 is what you could call financial dependency. No buffer, no plan, every month decided by whatever lands in the account on payday. Level 2 is the first real step up from that, and it has a specific number attached to it, a £1,000 cash buffer. That sounds modest, almost too small to matter, but government figures put 11.5 million UK adults in a position where they hold less than £100 in savings. That is not a rounding error. That is roughly 1 in 5 adults, one broken boiler away from a crisis. This is the part that catches people out. Reaching level 2 has almost nothing to do with investing. It means the whole idea of just start investing is meaningless advice for a huge slice of the population who are still fighting to keep the lights on. Level 2 is about stopping money leaking out faster than it comes in, usually through high-interest debt sitting at 19% to 30% APR on a credit card. I have watched people who earn a solid income well into their 50s, still carrying a balance from years earlier because nobody ever sat them down and showed them what that balance actually costs. Try this. A £2,000 credit card balance sitting at 25% APR costs you £500 a year just to stand still before you have paid down a single pound of what you actually borrowed. That is wealth flowing away from you every month, quietly, in the background, while you focus on the number in your current account. If level 1 sounds like where you are, there is a formal route out worth knowing about. The breathing space scheme gives you legal protection from creditor action and mounting interest for a set period, enough room to actually get your feet under you instead of firefighting every bill as it lands. But here is the twist almost nobody warns you about. Plenty of people get past level 2, build up real savings, and still feel like they are failing. They have the cash, they have followed every rule, and it still is not enough. That is the level 3 plateau, and it traps far more people than level 1 ever does. Level 3 looks like the finish line. You have 3 to 6 months of expenses sitting in savings. You sleep better, you feel safe, but there is a phrase for exactly where you are standing, and it is not flattering. Expensively broke. I used to think a big cash pile was the end goal. I felt proud of my emergency fund, right up until I worked out it was a stagnant pool that was not actually buying me a single day of freedom. It just sat there, doing nothing, while I told myself I had made it. This is the trade-off nobody spells out. Money sitting in an ordinary savings account is not neutral. It loses ground every year to inflation, quietly, without a single statement ever telling you so. £75,000 earning 3% in a standard account, against inflation running close to 4%, is not standing still. It is shrinking in real terms year after year, while you feel like you are being responsible for holding on to it. This is the cash-hoarder trap. £50,000 to £100,000 sitting in a high street savings account, untouched, treated like a trophy rather than a tool. And the system itself is signaling that this behavior needs to change. From the 6th of April 2027, the amount anyone under 65 can hold in a cash-I drops to £12,000 a year, down from the full £20,000 allowance available today. Read between the lines and the message is clear. Cash hoarding on this scale was never meant to be the end goal. Picture the maths side by side. Someone holding £80,000 in an easy access account, watching it barely keep pace with a single council tax bill each year, next to someone who has moved even half of that into a mix of short-term bonds and a global index fund. Same starting point. Very different trajectory 5 years out. The first person feels safer today. The second person is actually building the runway that gets them out of the workforce on their own terms. Most people stay at level 3 for the rest of their working life because they believe the only route to level 4 is a bigger salary landing in their account. At 55, 58, 60 years old, with income that has already peaked, that belief keeps them frozen exactly where they are. It is wrong. The route out has nothing to do with what your employer pays you. Level 4 has a name that sounds almost too simple, freedom of time, but the milestone behind it is precise. 3 years of liquid runway, enough money positioned so you could walk away from paid work tomorrow and not touch a single growth asset for 3 full years. For anyone in the 55 to 65 bracket, this is where the standard advice quietly falls apart. The usual line is split every pay rise, save harder, and eventually you arrive. But if your income peaked years ago, there is no bigger pay rise coming. The way you actually get to level 4 at this stage of life is not earning more. It is asset realignment, rearranging what you already have so it does the job a salary used to do. Here is the structure, and it only takes a moment to see why it works. Tier 1 is 2 years of expenses held in cash or premium bonds, money you never touch for growth, purely there so a downturn cannot force your hand. Tier 2 is 3 years held in short-term gilts or bonds, positioned to hold its value against inflation without the swings of the stock market. Tier 3 is everything beyond that, invested in a global index fund, doing the long-term growth work while Tiers 1 and 2 buy you the time to leave it alone. There is a second lever available here that most people never touch, and it is entirely within your control. Defer your state pension for just 1 year past the current age of 67, and your payment increases by 5.8% for life. Not for a year. For the rest of your life. No employer will ever hand you a guaranteed pay rise like that, and yet almost nobody takes it, because the instinct at 67 is to grab the money as soon as it is offered. Put the pieces together, and level 4 stops being about how much you earn and starts being about how your money is arranged. Someone with £400,000 spread properly across those 3 tiers, plus a deferred state pension building in the background, is in a fundamentally different position from someone holding the same £400,000 entirely in one easy access account. Same total. Completely different amount of choice. One of them can absorb a bad year without flinching. The other is one downturn away from making a decision they will regret for a decade. That gap in resilience, not the size of the balance itself, is what separates the levels from here on. But arranging the money is only half the test. What actually happens the moment you step into level 4 and the market decides to test you back? Picture 2 people, both 57 years old, both retiring in 2028, the year the normal minimum pension age rises to 57 and unlocks private pension access earlier than it used to. 3 months into retirement, the FTSE 100 drops 20%. Same market, same headlines, completely different outcomes, and the difference is not luck. The first person is still thinking like level 3, comfortable but with no real runway. When the market falls, their pension pot falls with it, and they still need money for groceries and bills. So they sell units at the bottom, locking in the loss, just to keep the lights on. Every pound they pull out during the crash is a pound that never gets to recover when the market eventually turns. The second person built level 4 before they needed it. When the same 20% drop hits, they do not touch a single equity holding. They live off the 2 years of cash sitting in Tier 1, exactly as it was designed to be used, and let the growth portion sit untouched through the fall and the recovery that follows. No panic, no emergency decisions. Just the plan doing what it was built to do. This matters more for you than it did for your parents. The state pension age is now 67 for most people, up from 66, and that shift did not happen quietly. If you retire from private savings at 57, you are now bridging a full 10 years before the state pension arrives, not the shorter gap your parents planned around. Every year without a runway strategy is a year that bridge gets shakier under your feet. Notice what actually separated these two people. It was never the size of the pension pot on the day the market fell. Both had built a decent amount over their careers. The difference was entirely in how that pot was structured in the months before the drop happened, and whether a cash buffer had been set aside on purpose rather than left to chance. Once you have that runway in place and a crash cannot force your hand, a different question opens up. How do you move from simply surviving a downturn to reaching the levels where money stops being something you think about at all? Level 5 is flexibility, roughly 10 years of runway built up around you. Level 6 is what most people picture when they hear financial independence, a runway that stretches longer than your likely life expectancy. On paper, someone at level 6 never has to think about money again. In practice, that is not what happens. I have sat across from people with £1,500,000 built up who still check the clearance rail before buying a jumper. Numerically, they are secure for life. Psychologically, they are still living at level 3, still braced for a shortfall the maths says will never come. That gap between the number on the statement and the feeling in their chest is what I would call the oversaver paradox, and it traps people just as effectively as debt does. There are two paths from here, and they lead to very different retirements. The fragility path looks responsible from the outside. Hoard cash, avoid the markets, worry endlessly about what the tax office might take. It feels safe. It is actually just a slower version of standing still, because inflation erodes hoarded cash exactly the same way at level 6 as it does at level 2. The resilience path uses the tools already built into the system. The tax-free lump sum allowance lets you draw up to £268,275 completely free of tax across your pensions. Used with intention, as part of building or topping up your runway rather than pulled out and left sitting in a current account, that allowance does real work. It funds Tier 1 and Tier 2 of your structure without a tax bill attached, which is about as close to free money as the system offers anyone. The people who reach level 6 comfortably are usually the ones who treated that allowance as a building block rather than a windfall to spend the moment it landed. There is one more level above this, and it is the one most people get wrong, not because the maths is hard, but because of a specific trap built into how this country taxes what you leave behind. Level 7 is intergenerational wealth, money built with enough surplus that some of it is designed to outlive you and land with the people who come after. It sounds like the finish line. For a lot of people at this stage, it becomes its own kind of trap. This is the panic I see over and over. Someone hears that inheritance tax can take 40% of an estate, and they start spending down savings fast or giving money away they might actually need later, purely to dodge a bill they may never have owed in the first place. Between the standard nil rate band and the residence nil rate band, a single person can often pass on £500,000 tax-free, and a couple combine those allowances to shelter £1 million or more before inheritance tax even applies. Plenty of people terrifying themselves over a 40% hit were never going to be anywhere near that threshold. Pensions add another layer, and this is where the ground is actually shifting under people's feet. Under the pension rules as they stand, most pension funds sit outside your estate for inheritance tax purposes, which is exactly why the old advice was to leave your pension untouched and spend other savings first. That protection has a use by date. From the 6th of April 2027, under the Finance Act 2026, most unused pension funds move into the estate for inheritance tax for the first time. The strategy that worked for your parents' generation will not work the same way for yours. I have sat with couples who were terrified of that 40% figure, cutting back on their own comfort, quietly making themselves fragile again just to protect their children from a tax bill that, once you actually ran the numbers, they were never going to owe. Fear made them poorer today for a threat that was not real yet, and it now needs a genuinely different plan for when it does become real from 2027 onward. The simplest move at level 7 has nothing to do with spending less or giving money away early. Check your expression of wish forms on every pension you hold. It takes minutes, it costs nothing, and it is the one step almost everyone at this level has left sitting undone for years. None of this was ever really about the number sitting in your account. £50,000, £500,000, £1,500,000, whatever your figure is. The real measure is how many months of freedom that number actually buys you. That is the whole difference between the 7 levels. Not the size of the pile, the optionality it hands you. Whether you are still building your £1,000 buffer at level 2, or you are already sitting on 10 years of runway at level 6, the direction of travel is the same for everyone watching this. Move away from fragility. Move toward having genuine choices about how you spend your time. None of the levels above you disappear because you are starting later than you would have liked. The 55 to 65 window is not too late to shift where you sit on this ladder. It is simply the window where the shift matters most, because the margin for waiting has narrowed. The changes coming to cash ISAs and pension inheritance tax rules from the 6th of April 2027 and the pension access age moving to 57 the following year are all reshaping this ladder for people exactly your age. Subscribe to Arthur's UK Retirement Guide and join the people working through each of these shifts with me, one video at a time. Retirement is not the end of the climb. It is just where the view starts getting better. I will see you in the next one.